Hello, so we're gonna move on to exam 2, lecture 1. Exam 2, we will mainly focus on the human disease caused by bacteria, followed by control of microorganisms, and we're gonna also talk about antibiotics. So what I'm going to do is that I will draw a lot of on the blackboard, and the slides will be a reference. So you're gonna read the slides, and I also gave you some of the after class reading material. Put on the eCampus, you can go ahead to read. But the major, what I'm going to do is draw on the blackboard. So I have each individual video for each separate bacteria, okay? Now, first a couple of slides, we just give you an opening remarks. This part of the slides, we will talk about respiratory tract disease. So this is anatomy, a little bit of talk about respiratory tract. So you see the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. Now the difference is here, the separation is epiglottis. So upper the epiglottis, we call it URT, and lower than that, which means lots of them are long area, we call it LRT. Now on the top, you can see you have a nasopharyngeal, nasal sinus, you have a tongue area, you have a tonsil area. Now I want to mention is that the tonsil area usually is a reservoir of the bacteria. That's why some of you, the tonsils has been taken out when you were young, because that's a reservoir for bacteria. Some of the bacteria will be there, and then later on, they may be translocated, and then they cause a problem. So those bacteria, we say they're looking for opportunity to cause disease. We call it opportunistic pathogen. Now, epiglottis, this is the one, you have a very soft bone there, which can be separate between the lung and also the esophagus, which go to the stomach. Okay, so that's why your mom will tell you, you don't, when you eat, you don't laugh, you don't talk, because the epiglottis, the soft bone, may be open or maybe either closed or open. Then what happens, the foods will go to the lung area. Okay, so that's some common sense. But the epiglottis, that soft bone, some of the disease will cause the soft bone to unclose it, to cause further damage when you're eating, and some of the food will go to the lung area. Now below the esophagus, you will see there are the bronchi, there's the lungs, there's the alveoli, all these, which is the lung area. Now some of the pathogen, if they have very invasive activities, it will go there. Let's say Streptococcus pneumoniae, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus pyogenes, all those things will cause further disease in the lung area. Okay, including the one we talk about is tuberculosis. So this is a very easy, we talk about the respiratory tract. Now, this is a table, which is all these pathogens. We're gonna go over them one by one during the next video and some of the slides. So this is what we call is disease transmitted predominantly via respiratory tract and organisms involved. So we go over this briefly. Diphtheria, Corynebacteria diphtheria. We will talk about detail about that. Now, second one, the Bordetella pertussis will cause whooping cough. That's a very productive cough for young kids. Now, ammonia, lots of the pathogen will cause ammonia, including Streptococcus pneumoniae, Staphylococcus aureus, Legionella, Mycoplasma, Klebsiella, and ammonia cystitis carinii. Now, some of them we will talk very detailed, but some of them we just go very briefly about here. First of all is Legionella pneumoniae. Legionella pneumoniae, this means Legionella, which means army. Okay, so what happened is in 1970 in Philadelphia, there is an army convention. And after the army convention, lots of the soldiers or the members go to take a shower. And then the pathogen has been contaminated when they take a shower, because this pathogen is very like in the humidified environments. So encoding in a very humidified equipment like air conditioner, all those things will be a big reservoir for this pathogen. So therefore, the Legionella usually required to test in the drinking water to see whether you have this pathogen. So that's for Legionella. Now, Mycoplasma and pneumocytosis, these two, we call it, will cause walking ammonia, which means they have a symptom. You have a cough, you have a fever, but after that, after a certain period of time, it will be curing by itself or immediately without medicine. That's called walking ammonia in a very short period of time. Okay, so the others we'll talk about detail. This is Streptococcus infections, the pathogen which is Streptococcus pyogenes. That is called strep throat. And then meningitis, lots of the pathogen will cause meningitis, and that's age dependent. So we will talk about the Haemophilus influenza, Neisseria meningitis, Streptococcus pneumoniae. The last one we already mentioned in the lab section. You can look at my lab slides. That is talk about the lab video. That is tuberculosis. The pathogen is Mycobacterial tuberculosis. We're still going to mention here briefly. Now, one more thing I also want to mention, this class is lab and the lectures combination. So you should not be separate. Even some of the lecture exam, you're still gonna go back to see some of the lab slides and the lab videos because there's a connection between each other, okay? So here, I'm gonna finish this opening remarks, then we're gonna talk about these one by one. We go over these slides first, but then I'm going to draw on the blackboard each one pathogen by one pathogen. So first one, when you see here, this is Corynebacterial diphtheria, which is gram-positive rods and the palisades, club shape. And this is under phase contrast microscope. Now, what is going to happen is Corynebacterial diphtheria will generate exotoxin. They will inhibit the protein synthesis, and they are resistant to a drying process. And they usually transferring from the airborne transfer from nasopharyngeal secretion. So in a crowded area, usually will cause the transmission. Now, this pathogen, we need to know that this is a localized, which means it not have a very strong invasive. It usually happen in the tonsil area. And then the toxin, exotoxin, is going to cause damage in the nervous system, kidney, and the heart. So what are the symptoms for those two is raw neck, and typically you have a seedal membrane on the tonsil area. And this pathogen usually not going to happen in the United States, most of them for immigrant kids. The reason is in the United States, we have a vaccine called the DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, acera, and the pertussis vaccine. And because this is a toxin, so when we do the treatment, we need to use antibiotics and antioxidants. So this is, we just mentioned about the vaccine. This is the vaccination, what happened. This is the platform of the vaccination schedule according to the CDC in 2012. Now you have a rotavirus. What we talk about here is diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, which is DTaP. So let's say a newborn baby, they require to taking a shot at 2 months, 4 months, 6, 15, 18, and 4 to 6 years old. Now, why you have to taking so many shots? We call it a booster. Now, what happened is this vaccine is only going to activate the T cells. It's not going to activate the B cell, which means they're not going to generate a very strong antibody. Therefore, you need to do a lot of the boosters every certain time. We call it additional shots. Now here we also can see Haemophilus influenza, ammonium, and individual poliovirus. And you see mumps, measles, rubella, MMR. That's the one you all know that. If you're international students, you come to United States, you're required to take that one. And that is only one shot. Most of the time is one shot per your lifetime because that is coming from a live cell. So it will be inactivated to B cell, generate antibody. Now the others like hepatitis A, meningitis, those some things we will mention later on. But just let you know, this is a schedule, an immune schedule, which is uniform in the United States for all the newborn baby from their born and to like 4 to 6 years old. And we will mention this again in our examination 4 when we talk about the basic immunology classes. Now, this is something what happens is for the mode of action for diphtheria toxin. So why diphtheria will cause a problem? Now you have a two domain. This is called AB toxin, which is a two domain. A toxin is a toxin domain. B is a transmembrane domain. Toxin domain usually causes a toxin. The transmembrane domain will cause is a bleeding. Now what happened is the AB toxin, when they go to the cell, the human being cell, they will generate which is called the indocin. And at the beginning, the indocin is pH 7, but later on, it will become acidic environments, which means it's pH above 5.0. And then it will be separate. Now what happened is the A domain, which is going to prevent the protein synthesis. And the B domain, they transmembrane and they find another A domain to have a new toxin coming. Okay, so that's a procedure what they do. On the right side here, the figure you can see basically is the procedure how they do is A domain go ahead to prevent the protein synthesis because their prohibition, the elongation factor 2 during the protein synthesis. So the key point here is this is the AB toxin, a two domain, and they all have an indocin. That indocin is acid environment will be separate them. Then each of them they do their job to cause that toxication process. Okay, so here we're going to stop about here. Talk about corona bacterial diphtheria, and I have a separate video for that.